Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this very special webinar titled Qualtrax and the Power of Process Automation. This will be presented by Brenda Jackson, who is a Quality Assurance Administrator for the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. During this webinar today, Brenda will present how using process automation software has been a game changer for her organization. And then once she's done, I'll actually go into a real quick look into Qualtrax just so you can see how some of these processes can be automated with our software. Now, before we get started, let's go through a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, this demonstration and this presentation will be recorded, and so you'll be able to have access to that from our website. So if you would like to watch it again or share it with other people in your organization, it will be available for you to access. Also, we have slated some time for questions and answers towards the end of the presentation. So as you're watching, if you have questions that come to mind, please feel free to put those into the Zoom application question and answer section, and we'll go through those at the end to make sure that we're able to answer your questions. So just to introduce myself, my name is Karen Arriviaga, and I'm an account executive here at Qualtrax. We do have a mix of attendees on today, so everybody from current customers of ours to new people, to people who've never even heard of Qualtrax before. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are to give you some background before we dive into the presentation. Qualtrax is an all-in-one compliance management solution, and our goal with what we offer is to give organizations a way to manage the compliance burdens that they're under by automating different things in terms of their quality management systems. We offer a team and technology approach to our offering. We offer software that really helps with some of those core features in terms of ISO. And then we also, give me one second. And then we team that with we pair that with our team commitment to our customers and the industries they are in. We find if we can truly understand the burden our customer base is under, we can make sure that that's top of mind when we're thinking about how we service our customers, but then also how we add new product functionality to the system itself. We ourselves are ISO 9001, so we go through a lot of the same compliance burdens our customers are under. Plus, we use our product to help manage that as well. And so we're very familiar with some of the benefits that it brings. We've been around for 26 years and have been doing and helping organizations with this since then. We ourselves have about a 97% customer renewal rate with our customer base. Our customers are our biggest assets in terms of what we can learn from them and how we can better their experiences and help them get the most out of their investment with our system. And if you're at all familiar with Virginia Tech, we are located in Blacksburg, Virginia, just steps away from the university itself. And that is where our home base is. Well, now let's start getting into what you really want to see here, which is Brenda Jackson in her presentation. And I would like to introduce her to you. Brenda Jackson is the current Quality Assurance Administrator for the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. She most recently served as the Food and Drug Protection Division Interim Lab Manager from 2016 to 2018. And prior to that, she was the Quality Systems Manager there from 2009 to 2016. She joined the laboratory back in 2007 as the Quality Assurance Specialist and was a part of the team charged with implementing an ISO 17025 compliant quality management system. The laboratory, which tests human and animal food for pesticide residues, label claims, contaminants, and pathogens, received its accreditation to ISO 17025 back in 2010. Brenda served as the state lead for the FDA's Partnership for Food Protection Laboratory Accreditation Working Group and was a member of the AAFCO working group that revised the quality assurance, quality control guidelines for feed testing labs for the 2014 edition. Brenda also serves at the Accreditation Council for one of the accrediting bodies and is an ASQ certified quality auditor. Prior to joining the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Brenda worked in a private industry and academia. She has both a bachelor's and a master's degree in chemistry from Virginia Tech. Go Hokies. got to stick that in there. Brenda, if you can, I welcome you, and please feel free to take over the screen, and you can go ahead from there.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. And what I hope to review with you is not just the expected benefits of implementing a compliance management system, but more importantly, I think the unexpected benefits that you may find, and give you some examples of the benefits that we found, both from automation and the visibility and shareability of the processes in a system like this. I don't want to focus too much on the past, but I think it is instructive to think about where we came from, and I think this is an experience that is common to many organizations. When we began our pursuit of accreditation in 2008, we had a collection of both paper-based records and electronic records spread across file cabinets and databases and shared network files. This is a pretty common experience, I think, for many organizations. We were very good at creating records as we sought accreditation, but we didn't give a whole lot of thought to information retrieval. As a result, creating reports or status updates for management or responding to questions during audits, be they internal or external, tended to take a long time and was a very manual process because it involved digging through these various locations of records. So what we learned from this is while we were successful in becoming accredited and we had a robust quality system, we did not have an efficient quality system. In 2014, we were able to purchase the Qualtrax product. We bought the product in 2014, and I thought it might be instructive to briefly review the time frame that we used to implement the product. For various reasons, mostly scheduling issues on our end, we didn't have our training until May of 2014. We then spent the summer doing our document import and user setup and building workflows and doing all that background work that goes on with implementing this sort of system. And we rolled out our user training in October of 2014. By the end of December, we were fully implemented. We had a staff of 4 QA people that were working on this in addition to their regular jobs. So bear in mind that while you'll see a lot of benefits from implementing a compliance management system, and we certainly did, there is a time investment that's necessary up front. So what do I mean by complete implementation? That's a big phrase. We certainly started with document management, as I think everybody would. We included our document acknowledgement. Anytime you publish a document, you have to have some acknowledgement from staff that they saw it and read it. We also included our testing and our training, our competency assessment processes in this. And if a person only stopped there, you would still see a tremendous amount of benefit from a system like this. Many of my examples will focus just on these 3 points. But we went further. We imported or created workflows for all of our quality processes, and I've got several listed here. The most familiar one would be a nonconformity, corrective action, preventive action workflow, but also some equipment management workflow. We manage our audits through Qualtrax and several other things, and I'll touch on a few of these as examples as we go through the presentation today. I'll talk about specific benefits for each example I show, but let me start by setting the stage. Yes, we saw efficiency. We would expect that. But some of these impacts were not expected. The visibility that we achieved by putting information on a dashboard that every employee or supervisor could see, the ability of supervisors to be able to quickly retrieve information gave us the benefit and the impact of a much broader ownership and participation in the system than we had gotten before. It wasn't that people didn't want to participate, it was very difficult for them because accessing information was really challenging. So by presenting information on a dashboard and making it easy for people to access information or retrieve records or reports, we were able to broaden the participation and ownership of our staff in the quality system, and that was a huge benefit. So let me start with some specifics. I'd like to begin with document management, and anyone who has implemented a document control process without a compliance management system will be familiar with the challenges of what I call a manual system. You have to lock down documents so that changes are not made without proper approval, which means when someone wants to edit a document, they have to submit a request. Somebody has to receive that request and then release a document for editing and track and manage that editing and review process to make sure it goes through completion. Once a document is ready to be published, somebody has to update the header information with effective date and pagination and version number and handle the process of publishing a document and retrieving old copies, and there's lots of filing. All of that leads to a lot of manual work and a lot of opportunity for error. When you use a compliance management system, you can assign permissions or rights based on roles. So we could allow, for example, our supervisors to have permission to edit a document. By restricting it to certain roles, we didn't have to worry that we had to have a request to edit a document. Only the right positions could edit a document. So we didn't have to have that request to edit anymore. The system safeguards draft documents, and by that I mean only certain people can even see draft documents. The majority of our users cannot, so there's no risk that they will accidentally use a draft. Those people who can see draft documents will see a document that is automatically watermarked to indicate that it's a draft. So again, there's no risk that they will mistake it for a fully approved document or that we won't have it properly watermarked. The whole review and approval process can be automated. That's one of those things that one decides on during the implementation phase, is which documents go to which positions for review and which for approval. So when you're ready to release a document to be reviewed or approved, you simply click a button and the system knows where to send it, and that reviewer or approver receives an email telling them that they have a task. All of the tasks associated with what I call document management, updating headers and publishing and filing, all of that is completely automated, which means it's also risk-free. So we don't have the risk of silly nonconformances for not getting a version number or a pagination correctly updated. Ultimately, by automating all of this work, we ended up saving one full headcount, and we were able to repurpose that person to another part of the division, which for a state organization is a very big deal. We don't come by positions very readily. So this was a huge savings for us. An unexpected improvement in our process was the way that we were able to improve our document editing and review. Let me explain a little more about that. We all know the tasks that one should go through when reviewing or editing documents, but we found that when managing this via email and word of mouth, there was a lot of confusion. We might think that it had been, a person had reviewed a document when they hadn't. We might publish a version and it turns out it was the wrong version because there were so many being sent around in emails. All of that leads to frequent republishing of documents within weeks or months. And it's not that the process had changed, it was that somehow we hadn't gotten the document quite right. That leads to a lot of manual work for the person publishing the document, but it also means to a lot of work for the laboratory staff. So the lab staff has to read all these, acknowledge all these, be trained on all these, and that training is more robust if you have a stable process. If you're changing details of the process or the record keeping every few weeks or months, it's going to lead to error, especially if you're doing this with multiple documents. So our training is more robust if we don't release documents that frequently. And as a regulatory agency, we feel that leads to greater data defensibility. We have fewer errors, we have a more certain process. So I wanted to go back and try and quantify this. I looked at our document publication prior to implementing Qualtrax. And what I'm showing in this pie chart is the number of documents that various areas reissued within 6 months of their original publication. And again, it wasn't that the process changed, it was that we hadn't gotten the document right. And you can see several areas, nearly 20% of their documents had to be republished within 6 months to correct errors. One area, it was 45%. So try to put yourself in the position of a lab employee and half your documents come out again within 6 months. That doesn't engender a lot of confidence in the system, and with all that training and changing what you're doing, that could lead to a lot of errors. We found that after implementing Qualtrax, we had nearly 20% of our documents were rejected during the review phase, which is where you want those rejections to happen. That's part of the review, is catching those errors and making sure your documents are accurate and correct. I think the reason for this is the greater accountability that comes with a system that requires the reviewer or approver to check a box that ties their name to that review, and that's part of the document history. So there's simply greater accountability. It also eliminates errors of perhaps omitting a reviewer that we should have caught. So the system is automated, it knows which reviewers and approvers to go to, and those folks have a great deal of accountability to that task. And it's greatly reduced the number of document reissues that we've experienced. Another benefit that we found is the document acknowledgement is automated. We use a test. It's a simple one-question test that asks, have you read and understood the document? I think every organization has something similar. And prior to implementing this system, those tests had to be sent out by hand. They were emailed out, which means you run the risk of forgetting somebody, and then they don't do the task because they were never told. With this system, those can be predetermined during your setup phase, and these things are automatically sent out with an email notification. We have reports that go to the users and as a reminder, and those reports can then elevate through the hierarchy to supervisors if someone on staff is not completing their tasks. Supervisors are able to look at these reports anytime they wish through a single click. And one of my favorite benefits is that the quality manager does not have to spend so much time tracking who has completed their document acknowledgement. It used to take me about 1 full day per month to track which people had completed their document acknowledgement and which hadn't, and email the person or their supervisor. So we found that this really is allowing us to put the responsibility where it belongs. The responsibility, the notification goes to the person who has to complete the task. And quite frankly, it helps the QA manager not be the parent of the system anymore. This same benefit was realized with some other features in the system, not only the document acknowledgement, but a periodic document review. Whether you review your documents every 6 months, every 12 months, every 24 months, you can establish that during setup, and then reminders go automatically to the document owner. So no more do we have people coming down December 15th trying to run reports out of a database in QA to figure out what documents they hadn't reviewed for the year. These are sent out automatically, and a supervisor can run a simple report with a simple click to see what the status of their documents would be. We also found that test or training completion reminders can be sent automatically, and this again helps take the duty, the responsibility of reminding people off of QA and puts accountability on the people, which is really where it belongs. We found the testing feature to be a pretty powerful tool in evaluating competency. We were able to grant permission to create tests to certain roles, usually supervisors. They're empowered to create tests, as many as they want, and assign them to the appropriate staff whenever they feel the need. This gives them the ability to evaluate comprehension and competency at different levels. Your expectations of comprehension after initial training are very different than your expectations after a person has been performing a process for several months or a couple years. This allows the supervisor to have an initial test just to make sure you understand what you're supposed to do, and then a while later send another test to evaluate if you know why you're doing these particular steps. We've also been able to use this for what I'm calling a focused evaluation. Whether we've had a particular problem in the laboratory and had to do some troubleshooting and had to implement a new step, if we have a new piece of equipment, something very specific that we want to evaluate people's understanding of, we can create a test for that. So some of these tests may go out anytime there's a new process, and some may be one-use tests. The grading is automatic, so it saves the supervisor the time of having to grade tests. It happens instantly. And it's very easy for the test giver to review the attempts that various people have made, so they can evaluate if one person is really struggling with the information. They can evaluate whether the entire group of test takers struggled with a particular point, because they can readily see everybody's responses and how many times they have attempted the test. So this has become a really powerful tool for those supervisors who chose to use it to evaluate technical competencies in ways that the QA group really was not positioned to be able to do. The system has been an enormous help when it comes to training records. Anybody who has managed training records in a paper system understands that it becomes, frankly, a nightmare very quickly. You have multiple copies of documents, you have very complicated files, it's easy to lose paper records, authorization records that are handwritten can easily be lost, and trying to figure out who's trained on what and what the status is a very, very time-consuming operation when you're using paper records. In addition, if you have a paper-based system, from day one, the ownership and accountability of training does not reside with the trainee. The supervisor has to create a list of documents or processes the person has to be trained on and give it to them. Until the trainer or supervisor provides that information, the trainee really can't do very much. By going to an automated system, we were able to develop our training assignments per test or technology, and those assignments are made to the groups of people that perform that test or technology. So if a person is put into a particular group, then all of those training assignments automatically populate to that person. So from the get-go, the trainee can see on their dashboard what they are ultimately responsible to be trained on. They are also empowered to upload their own documentation or data suggesting that they're trained and submit it to their supervisor. So they have the responsibility for doing that. It's very clear to the supervisor what they're signing off on, because in the sign-off step, they can open whatever the employee has uploaded. They can review that data, and if they feel something is missing or they want to see some more information, they can send it back to the employee and use a comment field to clearly describe what information needs to be added. So you've got good communication between the supervisor and employee, and you've got a lot of accountability on the employee. Finally, the supervisors have really appreciated this automation because they're able to run reports and track training with just a couple of clicks, whereas before it took hours of digging through filing cabinets to figure out the status of everybody's training. From QA's perspective, we have been able to use the scheduling feature for tests and trainings to make all of our training much more efficient. We've been able to create tests or trainings and schedule them for later in the year. So for example, if January is a slow month, we can put the time into developing trainings, and we can link to some very good training materials that are available online. not just text or PowerPoint, but video materials, so that these training assignments can be very meaningful and impactful to the trainee. We can create these in January, for example, and schedule them to go out automatically in July. So now QA doesn't have to remember to send it out. It happens automatically. The trainee receives the training assignment and can perform it when it's convenient to them. So it minimizes our disruption to lab operations by minimizing how many things we have to pull people out of the laboratory for. And it lets us focus our efforts for those in-person trainings for the really important topics. One example is ethics or a professional conduct policy. Many of us send a training and a test out annually for that, so we can take the time when it's convenient to improve our training or update it, and then we can schedule it for several months down the road. Another feature of being able to develop trainings and readily retrieve them and assign them is for new employees. We can create a new employee training that might hit the high points. It takes a long time to train an employee on the entire quality management system, but we may need a new employee to understand a few key points right away. So we can develop that training around the few key points. We can send it to them promptly upon their hire date, and it avoids having to have a supervisor talk to someone in QA and hope that we can schedule a time for QA and the new employee to get together to do the training. We can simply deliver it to their computer so they can complete that training in their first few days. We can also use this as a supplement to in-person training. We may provide a training to give people some material to review so that when they come to the in-person training, they're already familiar to some extent with the topic that we'll be talking about, and it can allow our classroom time to be more effective because it's a more meaningful discussion, or maybe we can use examples and hands-on activities because they've already reviewed the information. Not every training requires classroom time, so the training module in the system has allowed us to minimize that classroom time for only the really important topics. And by having these modules designed and stored within the system, we can reassign them as we need to throughout the years, and to only those employees who may need a little refresher. I'd like to move now into some examples for workflows. We've talked about documents, we've talked about trainings and tests. And now these various quality processes that we implemented in the system. We did these largely through workflows. The first workflow I want to talk about has to do with equipment management, equipment calibration and verification. You see at the bottom of your screen the types of equipment that I'm referring to, and this is equipment that our QA group largely manages in terms of scheduling verifications and calibrations and tracking the associated certificates. We used to keep our calibration records in a logbook, and the way we knew what needed to be calibrated or verified in a coming month was to review the logbook. Now, the logbook was very detailed, but it became the purview of one person. So that one person had responsibility for reviewing the logbook to see what had to be calibrated that month. So we ran the risk of missing something. We also ran the risk of that one person being out and then nobody else knew how to find the logbook or get through the logbook and see what needed to be calibrated or verified. By putting this into a workflow, it can simply appear on the dashboard. So you're not running the risk of only one person knowing how to manage this, and you're not running a risk of missing something. Data review that goes along with calibration and verification can be very time consuming. We used to use a spreadsheet. So you'd have somebody trying to review data and somebody trying to use the spreadsheet, which led to multiple copies of the spreadsheet. And it became very complicated to try and track where the original data was and where the new data was and who was reviewing what, because we would have these multiple records and conflicting access. By using a workflow, we have one workflow for each piece of equipment. And so when someone finishes with one piece, they can move on to the next, and the reviewer can be working on the data review. Similar comments apply to recording observations related to maintenance or records, such as data and certificates. We used to have these stored all over the place. It was difficult to review. Now we have one workflow. It captures the information related to one piece of equipment, including certificates. It also captures observations made during maintenance or verification or calibration. So we can see the history of each individual balance or pipette or piece of equipment within one workflow instance. So it's greatly tamed our records with respect to this sort of equipment, and it's a very clear and transparent record system that we have now. We created a workflow for internal audits simply to manage the audits. The audit themselves, of course, still happen outside of the Qualtrax system, but we found tremendous benefit by managing the audit process in the system. Right off the bat, the quality manager can initiate a workflow instance, making an assignment for a particular audit, and they can specify what documents they want included in the audit. Most of the time, we got that right, but every now and then, an auditor would miss a document and it wouldn't get discovered until the end of the audit, and then we had to work it into another audit. So we've been able to improve our completeness of audits by managing it properly with assistance from the system. We've also required that the auditor has to write their findings prior to reviewing them with the quality manager. Now that, of course, is how it ought to work, but when you have a quality group whose desks are all in one area right next to each other, it became easy to get just a little casual and start discussing the audits before the findings were written. By requiring us ourselves to write findings in the workflow prior to review, we're able to clarify the auditor's thoughts, and the quality manager is better able to understand exactly what might be cited. This improved clarity has helped the quality manager bring consistency in applying the quality system to every different section of the lab and ensuring consistency between auditors. And that's a goal I think every organization continually strives to improve. We've certainly had improved communication because of all this clarity with lab supervision, and the lab supervisors appreciate the fact that they can very quickly and easily go back to prior audits if they wish to and see what their challenges may have been or what their positive findings were. Certainly having all these processes managed in one system improves the linkages between audit findings and corrective actions. Recall at the beginning of the presentation, I talked about the fact that prior to implementing this system, we had standalone databases. So an audit finding might be recorded in one database and a corrective action in a separate independent database, and trying to link those together was always a challenge. By incorporating this into one system, you're better able to link those, which means you have better traceability. A surprising improvement that we found was our internal audit time was greatly reduced. We were able, at our desks, to look at most equipment records. We were able to find training records. We were able to find method verification or validation. We were able to find a lot of this information with just a few clicks at our desktops. And audits started going really fast. You can see I've recorded about a 50% reduction in internal audit time. We also found that they were more thorough, simply because we could find the information. When you have to spend hours digging through filing cabinets, at some point you just tend to maybe assume that we found a couple of these records, so we probably have them all. It's a bad habit that auditors can fall into if they don't have a really easy way of retrieving information. So we found a great deal of improvement simply by managing ourselves with a good process. One workflow that we did not build immediately, because we did not immediately recognize the need for it, was tracking action items for management review. The previous version of 17025 required that management review actions be documented, assigned to somebody, and dealt with in an agreed upon timescale. And we were very good at that part. So we, during a management review, would document our action and assign it to somebody and agree on when action should be completed. And after the meeting, we would email it out to people. And then 6 or 12 months would go by and we would have our next meeting. And usually the day before, everybody started scrambling around to try and deal with their action items because they'd simply forgotten about them. The current requirements of 17025 require that management review address the status of action items from previous management reviews. I imagine the same sort of thing would go on had we not built ourselves a workflow. We'd get to the next management review and scratch our heads and wonder what exactly we had done about the agreed upon issue. By building a workflow, we're able in the meeting to make real-time assignments. They immediately go to the item owner's dashboard. They can see it every time they log into the system, and then they have tools within the workflow to record information. That was another challenge we had. Even if somebody had worked on a workflow, or excuse me, an action item, they would write their information in a notebook or send it in an email, and by the time we got to the meeting, it was hard to find that. By using a workflow, they have a proper place to record it. It's easily retrievable. So that was a good improvement, but I think there's more that can be done. We are currently developing a workflow that will be even more robust with respect to management review. And it will include the idea of risk, which is new to the 2017 version of 17025. The quality manager will be able to assign topics to attendees prior to the meeting. This allows the attendees to consider the risks or opportunities at their leisure prior to the meeting, which should mean that we get better input, better feedback, since they have time to think about it. And that more considered input is better for the lab and its systems. We'll be able to use that information to record decisions during the meeting and launch workflows appropriate to whatever is decided. Those workflows, as I mentioned before, will go to the owner. The owner will have the tools to record their progress, and this will automatically feed results back into the next management review. This will allow us to include not just the steps specified by the standard, but even more importantly, the intent of the standard, that management considers risks and opportunities, prioritizes, and deals with them as part of management review. I'd like to mention a little workflow that, again, we did not develop immediately upon implementing Qualtrax, but it actually became a great solution to a nagging problem that we had dealt with for years. When our reference methods update, we often learn about it through trade association publications. And for years, we had struggled with developing a good system of circulating those publications to the appropriate lab management. We tried tasking ourselves with putting them in mailboxes, and that didn't work. We would send emails, and that didn't work. We investigated getting multiple memberships so we could get multiple copies of the publications, but that became prohibitive. We had a comment about this circulating publications in management review annually for a number of years. Eventually, we realized we could simply create a workflow. By doing that, we define the routing of the publication, so it goes only to the relevant managers. There is accountability because this workflow tracks who does what at each step of the way. And since we implemented that workflow, according to our management review reports, we have had no negative comments about circulating these publications, which are important because they give us these updates to our reference methods. Now, the last example that I would like to share with you has to do with corrective action. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about corrective action in terms of a workflow. We can all imagine the challenges of tracking corrective actions with paper forms, multiple copies, and none of them are identical. Which one is the right one? Which one do we file? But we found that our laboratory also tended to skimp on certain steps. They were very good at implementing corrective actions, and then they wanted to rush through the monitoring just so they could close something out. And that often can be one of the more important phases of a corrective action. By building a workflow, we were able to give supervisors and the QA folks better visibility into what was happening with each corrective action at each step of the way. And we built ourselves a lot of approval steps in these workflows so that things couldn't get too far down the road without somebody giving some approval and challenging ourselves to be a little more thorough. The routing is mandatory in some of these workflows because we want to make sure it does go to exactly the right person. We also were able to build in a lot of fields in a workflow to give the laboratory opportunity to communicate. Our lab folks love to tell us the full story, but when you use a paper form, they often don't have the space. So we give lots of text fields and people can tell the complete story, and you find that you get more background, you get more important detail, and sometimes it can change the direction of your root cause or corrective action because you have more information available. This also helps prevent delays because sometimes if people can't explain the full story on a form before they give it to the next person to approve, they want to have a chance to speak with them and share all this extra information. By building those opportunities into a workflow, people are able to share everything that they feel is important about the topic before they move it on to the next person. We were also able to build in fields to upload scans of supporting information. What this did for us was keep it all in one place. Prior to this, we might have forms in one place and supporting information in 2 or 3 other places. So things got very scattered, and this allows us to have a much more streamlined record, which is good for everybody who may need to review that record. The surprising thing that we did not expect was that we were able to shorten the duration of our nonconformances and corrective actions. And eventually we figured out the reason we got faster at this is simply by putting the visibility on the supervisor's dashboard. Prior to using a compliance management system, we had several databases. The supervisors would have had to dig through each open corrective action to see which ones were theirs. In this system, supervisors are always able to see their own group's open corrective actions anytime they want. They can click on it and see what's going on with it, and they're able to offer support when needed or hold some folks accountable to making progress. So what was shocking to us, at one point, we had a 42% reduction in the time it took prior to Qualtrax versus post-Qualtrax to close corrective actions. And that was certainly something we did not expect to see when we implemented this system. So to wrap up, I just want to reiterate some of the benefits that we saw from automating our processes. Certainly, it streamlined our records and it helped us keep better track of our records. Surprisingly, it helped us place responsibility properly on the people that should be responsible. It helped us improve our accountability, which in turn gave us more participation. It was a more thorough system because people were better able to participate in it, and that gives us more confidence that we truly are compliant. I've talked about the shortened audit time. That applies not just to internal audits, but also to external audits. It used to take a full day for an external assessor to audit our management system, and now we can complete that in 3 to 4 hours, which either reduces the time on site or allows them to be in the laboratory a little bit longer. The impact of providing visibility for all of your tasks and processes is something I cannot overstate. Allowing our users and our supervisors to see what's going on enables them to participate better, which makes all of these processes faster. They're able to give us more thorough information, and they're able to retrieve information much better. All of that leads to a broader participation and ownership on the part of our laboratory staff. And I've already discussed the savings in time and money and staffing. So I hope that you appreciate some of the benefits and think that some of that might be something you would be interested in. And thank you for your attention.
Great, Brenda. Thank you so very much. We really appreciate you going through some of those benefits that you guys saw from using a system like Qualtrax. And so what I'll do right now, just to kind of close out the conversation, is quickly just go through a couple of points about Qualtrax. And can you see my screen?
I can.
Wonderful. And you see a bunch of circles?
Yes.
Fantastic. So, and Brenda touched on a lot of this, so I won't repeat much of what she said. But really, when you start looking at the core feature set of Qualtrax and what is offered in our system, you've heard us say that we're an all-in-one compliance management solution. So what that means is that when you purchase Qualtrax, you're going to get the functionality of these different types of features. So document management, tracking all of your documents in one location, really controlling that life cycle of the document process. Workflows, automating different processes that you have for your organization, and then testing and training, tracking competency and awareness. Great thing, all three of these sit on that reportable platform. So when Brenda really talks about that visibility, this is what she's referring to as the ability to pull these reports out of our system. What I'm going to do really fast, so we can get to our questions, because I see that we have a lot of great ones coming in, is I'm going to take you into Qualtrax. Now, each user at your organization will have their own unique username and password to get in. I'm going to log in as Trevor. Trevor happens to be a quality manager. And when they first log into the system, the first page that they'll come to is their dashboard, their inbox, where they're going to see the tasks that they need to complete in Qualtrax. Really easy for them to know exactly what they need to complete and get out of the system, and very user-friendly. When you log into Qualtrax, you're going to see these tasks divided into a couple of key main areas. Now, every task that you see here is also going to be tied to those email notifications. Those email notifications sent out based on this legend up here. So anytime something's newly added, approaching its due date, late, or expedited, those email notifications go to these individuals, letting them know that and reminding them they have tasks to complete. So when Brenda talks about holding users accountable for their actions and keeping people reminded of things they need to complete, this is really where this comes into play and really takes that manual work out of that, or the risk that something's going to be forgotten. Because I'll tell you, they're not going to be able to forget about it if it keeps reminding them. Plus, if it gets this expedited state, managers can even be notified, letting them know that something hasn't been complete. In terms of documents, you heard Brenda really mention a lot of details on how the documents are being processed and how they're being seen, but then also controlled. I'm just going to go into a document here. It's a PDF. However, the original version of the document is a Word document. We do a lot of things with the documents, including offering templates for your headers and your footers to make sure that some of this core information at the bottom of your documents is being automatically generated for you. If we go to properties, and I'm going to go to our history tab, we talked about the document lifecycle of the process of document control and how the system is going to be automatically collecting this information for you. What you're seeing here is a history of what a document, what is being captured with Qualtrax for a document. So you can see we've had 9 revisions of this specific document. You can see that you can see who edited the document, the start date, the release date, the publish date, the approval process, what changes were made. The changes made is actually an integration sometimes with track changes with Word, which will automatically pull this information into Qualtrax for you. And you can see edit reason. And what the system is doing is eliminating the need for you to now manually update a master document list. The system is going to be grabbing this information as it goes through the system automatically for you. And again, really helping reduce the time you're spending on document management. Another part that I just wanted to point out is the testing and training portion that Brenda talked about. And so tracking that comprehension, tracking that competency. She mentioned acknowledgement tests. This is a great example of an acknowledgement test that can be sent out automatically from our system every time there's a new published revision of a document. And so as soon as a document is of a test, please read this document, click yes, and hit submit. And by them doing that in Qualtrax, now quality managers and directors have the information that they need to prove who has done what within the system in terms of this specific document. You also have more detailed trainings that you can provide. So this is an example of a bloodborne pathogen training where you're telling somebody to review specific resources in Qualtrax and then take a test associated with those resources. When Brenda mentioned the manual work that if you've ever done training before and tracking training manually, it's a lot of work. What our system really allows you to do is as you're providing these tests and these trainings for people to complete, again, the system is automatically going to be capturing this information for you. So one of the popular reports that we see people run within Qualtrax if they want to run training reports is our training matrix, which allows you to see any group of users you want to dive into, click the tests and trainings that they are taking, run report, and it'll take you to that training matrix. So you can see specifically who has completed what in the system, what trainings are required, which ones are optional. This is a very popular report we see a lot of people run because it can give you that real-time data and visibility into what has been completed and what hasn't. And the last thing I'm going to touch on really quickly is workflows. Workflows, when Brenda started talking about some of the workflows that they're using right now at her organization, she mentioned ones like management review, equipment management, calibration records, but then she also mentioned internal audits and corrective actions. If we pop into this corrective action one, I'll take you to the diagram, and this isn't necessarily Brenda's corrective action workflow, but it's one of our best-in-class workflows that you'll get when you actually implement Qualtrax. And it's a great way to get started using workflows in Qualtrax. And what this workflow is going to do is take this form through a series of automated steps that are going to be sent to different individuals within the organization. So imagine at each step of the process, those automatic email notifications are going out and people are being held accountable for the steps that they need to complete in the system. There's a lot of benefits to these workflows. Number one, it really allows you to say that you have process control. We've seen with the new 17025 standard that there's an emphasis on this type of process control. And having something within a workflow like this, where you can guarantee that every workflow or every corrective action instance will follow the same process, you're proving process control. Nobody can deviate from this process because it's really built into a system. Because you have those automated alerts and role-based tasks going through at every step of the process, people are being held accountable for the parts that they need to complete. Plus, all of the records that you're recording are going to be in one place. So you can report on them. You can have visibility into those records. So you can be able to identify trends or risks as they're happening. Another great thing about Qualtrax workflows, and I see that there's a lot of questions that are going to prompt this conversation, so I want to get to the questions, is that these are also very configurable. You have a choice with Qualtrax in terms of how you want to get started with workflows. You can choose our best in class that will give you upon implementation that you can turn on with your system when we're helping taking you through the implementation steps, or you do have the ability to create your own. And so through that customization, you're really able to take these workflows and make them your own. Even the templates and this corrective action request that you see here, if I scroll up to the top and take you through some of the fields that we have here in step one, you might find that you have fields that you want to add to this or fields you want to take off of this form. That's absolutely okay, and we'll teach you how to do that during implementation itself. So what you'll find is that these are very configurable. You'll see over here the best-in-class workflows for 17025 are going to be corrective action requests, internal auditing, proficiency test monitoring, validation, and vendor approvals. But you're not limited to those. We have a workflow library that you can grab even more workflows from if you want to have a template to start off with, but then you also have the ability to create your own. We'll give you a workflow designer, which works very similar to Microsoft Visio, that will allow you to create your own processes within our system. All right, and that really is going to, I want to get to these questions before our time is up. A couple of other things before we get there. We do have our user conference coming up next week. So for our customers that are on, if we have anybody that's coming to Blacksburg, our user conference is a great way to network with other users of Qualtrax. Brenda, you and your team are going to be there, and we hear that they're going to, we have a superhero theme this year that we're very excited about. And so it should be a great time. But what we find is some of our users really take this time to network and learn with other users of how they're using the system and get more hands-on training. And then let's jump into these questions. And again, for people who have questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A section and we'll be happy to start going through these. But Brenda, I will read some of these questions off to you, and I think some of them you'll probably have an answer for, and then I might even have an answer for as well. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, the first one is from Robert. What is generally the most time-consuming portion of development and implementation with Qualtrax? How difficult and time-consuming is it to get all of your existing documentation into Qualtrax? So it's kind of a two-part question.
For us, the most time-consuming portion was building workflows, and it's not that building a workflow is so challenging. It's that once you create a workflow and you start testing it, you realize all of the things you wish you had put in at the beginning, so you have to go back and tweak it. So it's that developing and revising workflows. It's not hard, but it is time consuming. So that's what we found. And we were in a particular situation where Access was going away, Microsoft Access. So we had no choice but to get all of our processes into workflows because we were going to lose our Microsoft Access, and it was either get into Qualtrax or go back to paper. Most organizations wouldn't be facing something quite that dire. So we had a time crunch, and that was difficult just to get those. We never got any of them right the first time because we were going rather quickly. As far as the time and difficulty to get existing documentation into Qualtrax, it's really quite easy. That's not the challenge.
Great. Yeah, and to kind of expand on what Brenda is also talking about as well, what we've heard from our implementation team is like the hardest part about workflows is sometimes the creation. And so to mirror what Brenda said, is coming up with exactly what you're going to be asking at which step, who's it being routed to. And so if you can get that portion of the workflow figured out for your organization, then it's like Brenda mentioned, it's easier to get those workflows up and going and actually creating them themselves. But that's ultimately why we've started the best-in-class workflows. Brenda, how long have you been using Qualtrax?
Since 2014, and at the time, I don't think the company had a collection of best-in-class workflows. Mm-hmm. So it was a little bit different era when we started.
Mm-hmm. And to Brenda's point, when we started offering the best-in-class workflows last January, so in 2018, and the reason why we started offering these is because we were hearing from our customer base that workflows and developing them and getting them going for their organization can be tricky. So we're like, all right, well, how can we make this easier for our customer base? We started coming up with the best-in-class workflows to give you a starting out point, to show you that some of these processes can be used from this template. And so what we do is train you to these templates and even teach you how to adjust these templates to best fit your organization's needs. And we found that some people are really able to get up and moving with workflows faster through this. Next question is from Wanda. What would you say is the most challenging part of implementing this automated system?
Actually, I don't think it's anything to do with the product. I think the most challenging part is going from whatever system you used to have to this new system and trying to think outside the box. What opportunities can you utilize with this product to make yourselves more efficient? So you could simply replicate whatever it is you're already doing, but there might be better ways. So I found that to be the most challenging part, is tasking ourselves with thinking outside the box. And just because we've always done it a certain way doesn't mean that's the best way to do it.
Great point. Yeah, and we've seen our trainers, the people that are actually training our customers on how to use the product. We've been really lucky in the sense that some of them have actually been customer of ours prior to working for Qualtrax. And so what they bring to the table when they train you is some of that understanding and best practices in terms of what they've learned from using Qualtrax in their settings at their organization. And then what they're able to bring to Qualtrax and teach our new customers. And so when they're training you, they're starting to talk about best practices, and we'll talk you through some of those challenges. Like if they see something like, well, we've seen people be really successful this way. And so they really have that on the top of their mind when they're going through that implementation process with you. All right. Here's another one. Did you start all of your workflows from scratch, Brenda, or do you have a template that you could modify to your needs?
Well, we've talked about the fact that there were not best-in-class workflows back in 2014, though there were available to us workflows from other customers that were in a library at the Qualtrax site that we had access to. We chose to start ours from scratch, and that was largely a personal choice for our organization. That's just sort of who we are. It wasn't necessary because there were other examples that we could have followed.
Great. And a question, Wanda, that you have for us, do you offer workflows from other customers that may have the same needs or requirements? We do have some customers that do share workflows with each other. That is definitely something that we see happen. In fact, when I mentioned the user conference, sometimes that's where some of the sharing occurs, is that people start talking, they start networking, and one person has a workflow that might work for another organization, and they're sharing templates and backwards and forth. If we have templates, they're going to be found in our workflow library that you're able to get access to. It's on our support portal. So when you become a customer, you'll be able to have access to that. And you can simply download those workflows into your instance. Now, I will say that even with these templates, there's going to be some customization that you'll need to do. I think one of the workflows, Brenda, you talked about was equipment tracking and equipment management. That's a workflow that we've seen many organizations do many different things because it's very specific to the different laboratories. And so sometimes one template is not a one-fits-all approach, but it is something that we've seen done, and we have a lot of people that are doing it, so it's something that we can absolutely help you through with that process. Here's a question. Does Qualtrax work well with existing ERP systems? And Brenda, I'll take this one. So Qualtrax has an open API. We do have the ability, or you have the ability to use that API to integrate with existing systems that you have that also have an open API. What we've seen organizations do is if they have IT representatives or they have people that can build the bridge between the two systems, they're able to take our open API and connect it to another system's API through that bridge. So it is a possibility to connect it with other organizations or other software platforms if you have the tools to be able to do that connection. Elizabeth, I hope that was I was able to answer your question. And if there's anything that we can do to elaborate on that, please let us know. Here's another one, and I'm excited about this one. Is Qualtrax used by an analytical cannabis testing lab in California? Yes. Cannabis has been a very interesting space for Qualtrax in the last couple of years. We've seen a lot of interest from cannabis laboratories. At a lot of different steps of the process. So it's interesting, if I go back to some of the questions that we had earlier on about implementation, with cannabis laboratories, we're seeing a lot of startup cannabis laboratories bringing Qualtrax in at the startup phase. And by doing that, they're able to create their SOPs as they are starting up the laboratory and are putting them into Qualtrax. So it's a little bit of a different 17025. They've been 17025 for years and are taking their current system and adopting it to Qualtrax. Where with some of our cannabis laboratories, what we're seeing is they don't have systems, they're creating them from scratch, and they're using Qualtrax to help create those. They're bringing in their SOPs as they create them into the system, and they're just dragging and dropping them into their document folders. And then they're using our best-in-class workflows to really get started with some of those key processes that they have to manage for ISO 17025. So yes, the answer is we do have cannabis testing laboratories that are using us. We have some in California, Colorado, Massachusetts. I think we have one in Nevada, and we do have one in Canada as well. Any additional questions? These were great. Well, I don't see any additional ones coming in. Brenda, is there anything else that you would like to share before we end this presentation?
I don't think so. I think we've found the system is actually pretty user-friendly. And even though we had some users that were a little bit hesitant to think about change, they've found the system is fairly intuitive for them.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you, Brenda, so very much. We really appreciate the time that you took to create this presentation and do it today for our audience. And again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to Qualtrax. We'll be reaching out to just get some feedback of what you thought about the presentation itself. And we look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you so very much, and we hope you have a great day.